What if I told you that the White House press corps delivers briefings while standing on top of a swimming pool and they have no idea it's there? Or that a president's piano leg once fell through the floor because the entire building was about to collapse? Or that Abraham Lincoln's kids once drove a goat chariot through the formal staterooms while the Civil War raged outside? The White House isn't just the most famous address in America. It's the most layered, rebuilt, bugged, tunneled, and secretly haunted building in the country. Beneath its white columns and rose garden photo ops lie hidden pools, forgotten bowling alleys, bunkers built for nuclear war, and rooms that still don't appear on any blueprint. So, before you fall asleep tonight, let me take you on a tour they'll never give you in person, through 20 secrets hiding in plain sight at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Like, subscribe, and pretend you're signing the guest book, except this one feeds the algorithm instead of the archives. Forget the history books. This is the White House they don't want you thinking about. The Truman Gut renovation. When the White House nearly collapsed in the winter of 1948, during a formal reception, President Harry S. Truman felt the floor beneath his feet shift. It wasn't subtle. The wooden boards groaned audibly, and the grand chandelier overhead swayed like a ship's lantern in a storm. Guests glanced upward nervously. The president, characteristically unfazed, continued shaking hands. But privately, he knew the White House was dying. The executive mansion had stood since 1800, weathering fires, wars, and nearly a century and a half of ceremonial weight. By the mid-20th century, its bones were giving out. Inspections revealed catastrophic structural failure. The original wooden beams, many dating to the reconstruction after the British burned the building in 1814, had rotted from within. Load-bearing walls sagged. In one particularly alarming incident, a leg of Margaret Truman's piano punctured through the floor of her sitting room, dangling above the family dining room below. Engineers delivered their verdict. The building was on the verge of collapse. One strong wind, one heavy snowfall, and the symbol of American democracy could pancake into rubble. Truman faced an impossible choice: demolish the White House entirely and rebuild from scratch, preserve the facade, and gut everything inside. Political pressure mounted from preservationists who saw the building as sacred, and from pragmatists who saw it as a death trap. Truman, a man who valued both history and honesty, chose the middle path. Save the shell, replace the skeleton. In December 1948, the first family packed their belongings and moved across Pennsylvania Avenue to Blair House, a narrow townhouse that would serve as the presidential residence for the next 3 years. It was an extraordinary displacement. No president had lived outside the White House for this long since it was first occupied. Meanwhile, workers erected scaffolding inside the mansion's iconic walls and began one of the most audacious engineering projects in American history. The interior was completely gutted. Crews removed plaster, floorboards, mantels, door frames, anything that could be salvaged and cataloged. What emerged was a hollow shell, its famous exterior walls standing alone like a stage set. Photographs from the time show an eerie void, sunlight streaming through empty window frames, illuminating nothing but dirt and demolition. The White House had become a ghost of itself. Then came the steel. Over the next 2 years, engineers installed a modern skeletal framework, 650 tons of structural steel replacing centuries of wood. Concrete was poured. Foundations were reinforced. The building was essentially rebuilt from the inside out, a modern structure hidden within a historical costume. Workers reinstalled the salvaged architectural details wherever possible: the same moldings, the same mantels, the same marble. They reconstructed rooms to match their original dimensions and layouts, creating an elaborate theatrical reconstruction of presidential history. But it wasn't mere replication. New amenities were discreetly added: air conditioning, modern plumbing, updated electrical systems. Two additional sub-basements were excavated beneath the original basement, creating space for mechanical systems and storage. The building that Truman returned to in March 1952 looked identical to the one he'd left, but beneath the surface, it was entirely transformed. The renovation cost $5.7 million, approximately $6.7 million in today's dollars, a figure that sparked congressional outrage and public debate. Critics called it wasteful. Supporters called it necessary. Truman, typically blunt, called it both. "I found it in terrible shape," he later wrote, "and I was determined to leave it in better condition than I found it." He succeeded. The steel framework installed during the Truman renovation still supports the White House today, bearing the weight of history and power with industrial pragmatism. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. Here was America's temple of democracy, rebuilt from within while its public face remained unchanged, a metaphor for continuity and renewal, for the gap between appearance and reality. The mansion's facade had always been about projection, white paint symbolizing purity, columns evoking classical democracy, symmetry suggesting order. But now that facade concealed something entirely different: 20th century engineering, Cold War era infrastructure, modernity wearing history's mask. When the Trumans finally returned home, the president reportedly walked through the familiar yet foreign rooms with quiet satisfaction. The floors no longer sagged. The chandeliers hung steady. The piano stayed put. The White House had been saved, or replaced, depending on your philosophy. Either way, it would endure. And while the walls were being rebuilt, below them, in those newly excavated sub-basements, new secrets were being added. Spaces for communication, for crisis, for the machinery of modern presidential power. The renovation hadn't just saved the White House, it had prepared it for a new kind of presidency, one that would need secure rooms and hidden channels for managing threats that earlier occupants could never have imagined. The Situation Room, born from Cold War panic on April 17, 1961, Cuban exile forces stormed the beaches at the Bay of Pigs, launching a CIA-backed invasion meant to overthrow Fidel Castro. The operation was a disaster. Within 72 hours, the invasion had failed completely, leaving over 100 exiles dead and more than 1,000 captured. For President John F. Kennedy, just 3 months into his presidency, the catastrophe revealed something almost as troubling as the defeat itself. The White House had no secure, centralized facility for managing international crises. During those chaotic April days, Kennedy and his advisors had scrambled to coordinate responses across multiple locations. Intelligence updates arrived slowly through fragmented channels. Secure communications were difficult. The president found himself racing between the Oval Office, the cabinet room, and various telephone connections, trying to piece together real-time information about an unfolding foreign policy nightmare. The experience was humiliating and terrifying in equal measure. Kennedy resolved, this must never happen again. Within weeks, he ordered the construction of what would become one of the White House's most famous secret spaces, the Situation Room. The name itself was telling, not Operations Center or Communications Hub, but Situation Room, a phrase suggesting constant vigilance, permanent crisis, a government perpetually on alert. The facility was built in the White House basement, in what had previously been a bowling alley installed during Harry Truman's renovation. Engineers and intelligence specialists transformed the recreational space into a 5,000 square foot secure complex. The design reflected Cold War paranoia at its peak. Soundproof walls prevented eavesdropping, lead-lined chambers blocked electronic surveillance, and multiple layers of security clearance controlled access. Inside, banks of telephones and early computer terminals connected directly to the Pentagon, CIA, State Department, and military commands worldwide. At the heart of the complex sat the main conference room, dominated by a large wooden table where presidents and advisors would gather during crises. Clocks on the wall displayed multiple time zones. Maps could be pulled down at a moment's notice. Most importantly, a 24-hour watch team manned the facility continuously, monitoring intelligence feeds and communications channels, ready to alert the president instantly if trouble emerged anywhere on the planet. The Situation Room's first major test came just over a year after its creation, during the Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962. For 13 days, Kennedy and his closest advisors, the group known as XCOM, met there repeatedly, deliberating over Soviet missiles in Cuba and the possibility of nuclear war. The room became the nerve center for managing the most dangerous confrontation in human history. Kennedy used it to coordinate military readiness, diplomatic communications, and strategic planning, all while maintaining operational secrecy. The crisis ended peacefully, and the Situation Room's reputation was sealed. This was where presidents went when the world hung in the balance. Over subsequent decades, the facility evolved with technology. During the 1970s, video conferencing capabilities were added. Computer systems replaced paper files. Satellite communications enabled instant global connectivity. But the fundamental mission remained unchanged: provide the president with real-time intelligence and secure communications during emergencies. After September 11th, 2001, the Situation Room underwent massive expansion and renovation. The terrorist attacks had revealed new vulnerabilities and new kinds of threats. The facility was gutted and rebuilt with state-of-the-art technology. Digital displays replaced static maps, encrypted networks increased security, and additional conference rooms accommodated larger crisis management teams. President George W. Bush inaugurated the renovated facility in 2007, calling it essential to defending American security in the 21st century. President Barack Obama oversaw another significant upgrade during his administration, further modernizing the communication systems and enhancing cybersecurity protections. By this point, the Situation Room had become something more than a crisis center. It was a symbol of American power projection, the place where presidents monitored drone strikes, hostage rescues, and special operations in real time. The famous photograph of Obama and his national security team watching the raid on Osama bin Laden's compound in 2011 was taken in a smaller conference room adjacent to the main Situation Room, capturing that symbolic moment of presidential command. Yet for all its technological sophistication, the Situation Room remains fundamentally a product of mid-century anxiety, a space built on the premise that threats can be managed, crises can be contained, and presidents can control events if they simply have enough information quickly enough. It represents both the promise and the illusion of modern governance, the idea that somewhere, in a basement room full of screens and secure phones, order can be imposed on chaos. The room runs continuously, every hour of every day, staffed by duty officers who monitor global developments and prepare briefings. Most of the time, nothing happens, but the room exists for the moments when everything happens at once, when presidents need information immediately and decisions cannot wait. But before screens and satellite feeds, the White House hid other things underground, quieter, stranger things, spaces that spoke not to crisis management but to private suffering and unexpected humanity. The hidden pools beneath the floorboards. 1933. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt moved into the White House carrying a secret that everyone knew but few discussed openly. He could not walk. Polio had paralyzed him from the waist down 12 years earlier, leaving him dependent on leg braces, a wheelchair, and the careful choreography of aides who helped him stand for public appearances. The press, following an unwritten code of the era, rarely photographed his disability. The public saw a vigorous leader. Few understood the daily physical struggle behind that image. Roosevelt needed hydrotherapy. Water exercise had become central to his routine at Warm Springs, Georgia, where the natural thermal pools provided relief and maintained what mobility he retained. Without regular swimming, his condition would deteriorate. But the White House had no pool, so Roosevelt's supporters, led by the New York Daily News, launched a fundraising campaign, and by March 1933, just after his inauguration, construction began on an indoor swimming pool in the White House basement. The pool was installed in what had been a laundry room between the West Wing and the main residence. It measured 50 feet long and 15 feet wide, lined with pale turquoise tiles and illuminated by underwater lights. Murals depicting sailing ships decorated the walls, evoking Roosevelt's love of the sea. The president used it almost daily, often swimming in the early evening after the day's work concluded. For him, the pool represented both therapy and privacy, one of the few places he could move freely, without braces or performance, his disability neutralized by buoyancy. Other presidents inherited the pool but used it differently. Harry Truman swam laps for exercise. John F. Kennedy, who suffered chronic back pain from a World War II injury, relied on the pool therapeutically, much as Roosevelt had. White House staff remember Kennedy swimming multiple times daily, the warm water providing temporary relief from the pain that plagued him throughout his presidency. Lyndon Johnson continued the tradition, though less frequently. But in 1970, President Richard Nixon made a decision that would literally bury this history. The West Wing was being renovated, and the White House press corps needed a dedicated briefing room. Nixon, who did not swim and saw little value in preserving Roosevelt's pool, ordered it covered over. Workers built a floor directly above the water, installing the press briefing room that remains in use today. Journalists now stand on a platform suspended above Roosevelt's empty pool, delivering daily briefings entirely unaware of what lies beneath their feet. The pool was not destroyed. It was simply sealed. The tiles remain intact, the depth unchanged. Occasionally, maintenance crews access it for repairs to pipes and infrastructure that run through the space. These workers report an eerie quality to the hidden room. The old tiles still gleaming faintly in flashlight beams, the empty basin holding stagnant air, like a tomb for an era when presidents could keep their vulnerabilities private. In 1975, recognizing that presidents still needed exercise facilities, Gerald Ford commissioned an outdoor pool on the White House South Lawn. Unlike Roosevelt's discreet basement therapy room, this pool was visible, recreational, almost defiant in its ordinariness. Ford, an athlete in college, used it regularly. Subsequent presidents have maintained it, though its use varies. Some swim frequently, others ignore it entirely. The contrast between the pools tells a larger story about presidential privacy and public image. Roosevelt's hidden pool embodied the era's approach to disability and leadership, necessary accommodations hidden from view, maintaining the fiction of physical invulnerability. The outdoor pool of the Ford era reflected changing attitudes. Presidents could exercise openly, their human needs acknowledged rather than concealed. Yet something was lost in that transition. Roosevelt's pool was intimate, therapeutic, personal, a space where the most powerful man in the world could briefly escape the weight of office and disability both. The outdoor pool, for all its openness, serves primarily recreational purposes. It's a symbol of wellness, not healing, of luxury, not necessity. The buried pool beneath the press briefing room remains one of the White House's most poignant hidden spaces. It's a layer of history quite literally covered over, preserved by accident rather than intention. Journalists stand above it daily, asking questions about policy and politics, while beneath them lies a monument to a president's private struggle, to the gap between public perception and personal reality, to the ways we reshape history by building over it rather than confronting it directly. The tiles wait in the dark, holding water that will never return. in a room that serves no purpose except as evidence that presidential lives contain depths we rarely see, needs we seldom acknowledge, and vulnerabilities that power cannot eliminate, only hide. Of course, some presidents needed their space above ground too, and that's where the tunnels begin, threading beneath Washington's streets like veins beneath skin, carrying not blood but secrets, escape routes, and the machinery of continuity when everything else fails. The secret tunnels and escape routes. Beneath the stately columns and manicured lawns of the White House lies a hidden geography, a network of tunnels connecting the executive mansion to buildings across the complex and beyond. These passages are among the compound's most closely guarded secrets, their exact routes and capabilities known only to security personnel and presidents themselves. Yet their existence is no conspiracy theory. They are documented, verified, and have been used during genuine emergencies when the nation's leadership needed protection or rapid, concealed movement. The tunnel system began modestly. In the early 20th century, a utility passage was constructed connecting the White House basement to the Treasury building next door. This initial tunnel served mundane purposes, routing steam pipes for heating, protecting communication cables from weather, allowing maintenance workers to move between buildings without exposure to Washington's harsh winters. But utility quickly evolved into security. By World War II, as America faced genuine threats of foreign attack, the Secret Service recognized that the president might need escape routes if the White House came under assault. The tunnel to Treasury was reinforced and secured. Additional passages were quietly constructed, though the full extent of this wartime expansion remains classified. What is known, by 1945, the White House sat at the center of a small subterranean network, its tunnels protected by vault-like doors and monitored by armed guards. One verified tunnel runs from the White House basement beneath East Executive Avenue to the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, formerly the Old Executive Office Building. This passage allows White House staff and officials to move between the buildings regardless of weather or security concerns. During major events or heightened threat levels, this tunnel prevents crowds from forming above ground and reduces the visible footprint of presidential operations. Vice presidents often use this route to access their ceremonial office in the EEOB. Another critical passage connects directly to the Presidential Emergency Operations Center, the PEOC, or Presidential Bunker, deep beneath the East Wing. This tunnel isn't merely a walkway. It's a secure, reinforced corridor designed to move the president and essential staff to the bunker within seconds during emergencies. The exact route and specifications remain classified, but its existence became public knowledge after September 11th, 2001. On that morning, as hijacked aircraft struck New York and the Pentagon, Secret Service agents rushed Vice President Dick Cheney through White House corridors and down into the PEOC via this tunnel. The speed and efficiency of the evacuation revealed the system's purpose. In moments of genuine crisis, when every second matters, surface routes become untenable. The tunnels provide what security professionals call hardened pathways, protected routes immune to surface threats, whether those threats are conventional attacks, chemical weapons, or radiological dangers. The tunnel system expanded again during the Cold War, reflecting nuclear anxieties. While exact details remain secret, declassified documents and construction records suggest that during the 1950s and 1960s, the network grew significantly, potentially connecting to sites beyond the immediate White House complex. Some reports indicate links to underground facilities beneath other federal buildings, creating a web of protected pathways for continuity of government operations. However, these reports remain unconfirmed, and the government neither confirms nor denies the full extent of the system. Security experts note that modern tunnel systems likely include far more than simple passages. Contemporary bunkers and hardened facilities typically incorporate blast doors, air filtration systems for chemical or biological attacks, redundant power supplies, and secure communication nodes. The White House tunnels almost certainly include these features, transforming them from mere escape routes into survivable spaces where leadership could remain for extended periods if necessary. The tunnels have been used during several presidential emergencies beyond 9/11, though specific incidents remain classified. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, the system provided secure movement for advisors and military officials attending meetings in the Situation Room. During threats against presidents or major protests, the tunnels have allowed discreet evacuation or entry when surface movements would be impossible or dangerous. Yet the tunnels represent something beyond practical security. They embody an architectural anxiety about power's vulnerability. Every tunnel is an admission that the White House, for all its symbolic strength, sits exposed. Every reinforced passage acknowledges that presidents, despite their security details and military command, can be targets. The tunnels are monuments to fear, built in concrete and steel beneath the edifice of power. They also reveal how modern governance occurs increasingly out of sight. The public sees presidents walking across the South Lawn to Marine One, waving to cameras, projecting confidence. But parallel to these visible movements run invisible ones, leaders descending into tunnels, moving through classified passages, operating in spaces the public never sees. These hidden routes create a dual geography: the performative White House of tours and press conferences, and the operational White House of bunkers and secured corridors. Maintenance of the tunnel system requires constant vigilance. Engineers regularly inspect structural integrity, test air systems, and update security features. Yet this work occurs almost entirely in secret, carried out by personnel with top security clearances who cannot discuss their assignments even with family members. The tunnels endure because presidential vulnerability endures. As threats evolve, from conventional attacks to cyber warfare to drone technology, the underground network likely continues expanding and adapting, though these changes remain invisible above ground. The White House appears unchanged year after year, its facade eternal. But beneath that permanence lies constant evolution, secret spaces being reinforced and reimagined for dangers we hope will never arrive. And deep inside that network lies a bunker that tells its own story, a room built for the worst day in American history, waiting in silence for a catastrophe that has, mercifully, not yet come. The presidential bunker. In 1942, with World War II raging across two oceans and German U-boats prowling the American coast, Franklin Roosevelt faced a disturbing possibility. Washington, D.C. could be bombed. Hitler's Luftwaffe had devastated London. Japanese forces had struck Pearl Harbor. If enemy aircraft reached the nation's capital, the president needed a safe place to continue governing, even as explosions shattered the city above. That year, construction began on what would become one of the White House's most important secret spaces, the Presidential Emergency Operations Center, or PEOC. The original bunker was modest by today's standards, a reinforced concrete chamber beneath the east wing, protected by several feet of hardened material capable of withstanding conventional bomb blasts. It contained secure communication equipment, basic facilities, and enough space for the president and key advisors to ride out an attack. The location was strategic, deep enough for protection, close enough to reach quickly from the residence or Oval Office. Roosevelt used the bunker sparingly, as aerial attacks on Washington never materialized. But the facility's existence established a precedent. American presidents needed survivable spaces, places where government could continue even if the Capitol burned. This principle would define Cold War-era security planning and drive decades of underground expansion beneath the executive mansion. The PEOC underwent major upgrades during the 1950s as nuclear weapons transformed the calculus of presidential protection. Conventional bunkers offered no meaningful defense against atomic blast and radiation. Engineers responded by expanding and hardening the facility, adding blast doors, air filtration systems capable of screening radioactive particles and chemical agents, and communication systems that could function even if surface infrastructure was destroyed. The enhanced POC could theoretically protect occupants for extended periods with emergency supplies, independent power generation, and connections to military command networks. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, the POC stood ready as Kennedy and Khrushchev played nuclear chess over Soviet missiles in Cuba. Though the crisis ultimately resolved without the president needing to shelter underground, the facility's existence provided reassurance. Even in the worst case scenario, American leadership could survive and potentially retaliate. This concept, continuity of government, became central to Cold War strategy, and the PEOC embodied it physically. The bunker's most famous use came on September 11, 2001. Shortly after the second aircraft struck the World Trade Center and it became clear America was under coordinated attack, Secret Service agents moved Vice President Dick Cheney to the PEOC. The evacuation happened rapidly, with agents practically carrying Cheney through the tunnel passages as reports came in of additional hijacked aircraft, including one potentially targeting Washington. For hours that day, Cheney coordinated government responses from the bunker while President Bush was aboard Air Force One. The PEOC became the temporary seat of executive power, managing military scrambles, communication with agencies nationwide, and emergency decisions, including the controversial shoot-down authorization for hijacked aircraft. Journalist and official accounts from that day describe the PEOC as surprisingly cramped. Not the spacious command center of Hollywood imagination, but a functional space with low ceilings, banks of televisions, secure phones, and just enough room for essential personnel. National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice, Transportation Secretary Norman Mineta, and other senior officials crowded into the space, monitoring developments as the catastrophe unfolded above them. The facility performed exactly as designed. It kept leadership safe and connected during a genuine national emergency. Following 9/11, the PEOC underwent another round of modernization. While details remain classified, reports indicate significant upgrades to communication systems, computing infrastructure, and physical capacity. The post 9/11 security environment introduced new threats: biological weapons, radiological dirty bombs, cyber attacks on infrastructure, and the bunker needed capabilities to manage these diverse scenarios. Today, the PEOC remains operational, maintained constantly by military and technical personnel. Its exact layout, capabilities, and specifications are classified at the highest levels. What is publicly known: it contains secure video conferencing for connecting with military commanders and government agencies globally, direct links to the Nuclear Command Authority, medical facilities for treating injured officials, and life support systems capable of sustaining occupants for days or potentially weeks. The bunker is not merely a physical space, but a symbol of governmental continuity, the principle that American democracy must survive even the most catastrophic attacks. That principle drives enormous resources toward underground facilities, classified command centers, and redundant systems, ensuring that, no matter what, someone will remain in charge. Yet the PEOC also represents something darker: acknowledgement that we live in permanent potential crisis, that nuclear war or terrorist catastrophe hover perpetually just over the horizon, that presidents must always be seconds away from a fortified hole in the ground. The bunker is both insurance policy and admission of vulnerability, both practical necessity and architectural manifestation of fear. The facility remains classified enough that even routine maintenance and upgrades happen in secrecy. Workers require top security clearances, contractors sign non-disclosure agreements, the daily operations of keeping the PEOC ready never appear in public budgets or reports. It exists in that peculiar category of government secrets that everyone knows about generally, but no one can discuss specifically. Modern presidents receive detailed briefings on the PEOC early in their administrations, learning evacuation procedures, communication protocols, and what to expect if they must shelter there during an emergency. For most, this briefing remains theoretical, a contingency plan for a day that thankfully never arrives. But the bunker waits, ventilated and lit and ready, a room built for the worst moment in American history. Not all secrets were about safety, though. Some were about curiosity and control, about leaders who wanted to know everything and built systems to hear what others thought was private, systems that would ultimately consume their creators. The listening walls, bugs, wires, and microphones. In the summer of 1973, as the Watergate scandal consumed Washington, America learned a shocking truth. President Richard Nixon had been secretly recording conversations in the Oval Office for years. Thousands of hours of presidential discussions, captured on tape without the knowledge of cabinet members, advisors, foreign leaders, and visitors. The revelation seemed uniquely Nixonian, paranoid, controlling, ultimately self destructive. But Nixon wasn't the first president to bug the White House. He wasn't even the second. He had merely perfected a system that his predecessor had pioneered. Lyndon Baines Johnson installed the first comprehensive White House recording system in 1963, shortly after assuming the presidency, following Kennedy's assassination. Johnson, a notorious control enthusiast who needed to know everything about everyone, ordered microphones hidden in the Oval Office, cabinet room, and on his telephones. The system was voice-activated, beginning recording whenever someone spoke, capturing over 800 hours of conversations during Johnson's presidency. Johnson used the tapes as both historical record and political intelligence. He would sometimes replay conversations, studying them for insights into advisors' true opinions, foreign diplomats' negotiating positions, or congressional leaders' commitments. The recordings captured momentous decisions about Vietnam War escalation, civil rights legislation, and Great Society programs. But they also caught casual bigotry, political scheming, and the raw exercise of presidential power, LBJ bullying senators, manipulating allies, and obsessing over perceived slights. When Nixon took office in 1969, he initially discontinued the recording system, apparently uncomfortable with being taped himself. But by February 1971, his attitude had shifted. Nixon ordered a far more extensive system installed, with microphones in the Oval Office, cabinet room, Nixon's hideaway office in the Executive Office Building, the Lincoln Sitting Room in the residence, and on multiple telephone lines. Unlike Johnson's voice-activated setup, Nixon's system recorded continuously whenever he was present, capturing everything. The result was an archive of staggering scope, over 3,700 hours of tape, documenting nearly every conversation Nixon had in these spaces from 1971 to 1973. The system recorded discussions of foreign policy with Henry Kissinger, political strategy sessions, meetings with staff, and hundreds of phone calls. It captured the president's actual voice and temperament: profane, strategic, insecure, often brilliant, frequently vindictive. Nixon's stated purpose was historical, creating a comprehensive record for future scholars. But the truth was more complex. The tapes served his need for control, his desire to have irrefutable records of what people said, who made what promises, who could be held accountable. In Nixon's paranoid worldview, surrounded by enemies real and imagined, the tapes were insurance and ammunition combined. The system's existence remained secret, known only to a handful of staff and the Secret Service agents who maintained it. Nixon never informed the people he was recording. Foreign leaders conducting sensitive diplomatic negotiations had no idea their words were being preserved. Cabinet members debated policy unaware that their arguments were being captured. Visitors to the Oval Office spoke freely, not realizing that posterity would eventually judge their every word. The secret unraveled during the Watergate investigation. In July 1973, a White House aide named Alexander Butterfield, testifying before the Senate Watergate Committee, casually mentioned the recording system in response to a routine question. The room fell silent. Investigators realized they had stumbled onto evidence that could prove or disprove Nixon's claims about Watergate. Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox immediately subpoenaed the tapes. What followed was a constitutional crisis. Nixon refused to release the tapes, claiming executive privilege. Cox pressed the demand. Nixon ordered Cox fired in the infamous Saturday Night Massacre, which led to the resignation of the Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General, who refused to carry out the order. Public outrage forced Nixon to appoint a new special prosecutor, and courts ultimately ruled that the president must surrender the recordings. When the tapes were finally released, they revealed not just Watergate criminality, but something perhaps more disturbing: the gap between Nixon's public statements and private reality. On tape, he was crude, calculating, often drunk with power. Most damaging was the smoking gun tape from June 23, 1972, in which Nixon clearly ordered a cover-up of the Watergate break-in, using the CIA to obstruct the FBI's investigation. The tape destroyed his final defenses and forced his resignation in August 1974. The scandal led to reforms prohibiting secret White House recordings without participants' knowledge. The Presidential Records Act of 1978 established that all presidential records belong to the American people and must eventually be preserved and made public. Future presidents could still record conversations, but only with consent or for official historical purposes, with appropriate disclosure. Yet the tape's most lasting impact may be cultural. They shattered presidential mystique. Americans heard their president plotting, scheming, revealing himself as all too human, petty, insecure, vindictive. The recordings transformed how we understand presidential power, revealing the performance of leadership as distinct from its reality. Every president since has operated knowing that private conversations might someday become public, that the walls no longer keep secrets reliably. The 3,700 hours of Nixon tapes remain at the National Archives, most now available to researchers and the public. They stand as monuments to the dangers of presidential secrecy, the inevitability of accountability, and the way technology meant to preserve power can ultimately destroy it. But before the microphones, presidents left their marks in bricks and blueprints, expanding the physical footprint of their office in ways that changed how power itself was exercised and understood. The West Wing that wasn't always there. When George Washington selected the site for the presidential residence in 1791, and when John Adams first occupied it in 1800, no one imagined a West Wing. The concept didn't exist. The original White House design included no separate office building because the presidency itself was a modest affair. A president, a handful of staff, and perhaps a secretary or two. Official business occurred upstairs in the residence, in rooms that also served family purposes. The president's office might be down the hall from his children's bedrooms. This arrangement worked reasonably well for the 19th century. Even as the nation expanded and presidential responsibilities grew, the executive branch remained relatively small. Abraham Lincoln conducted the Civil War from an office in the residence, working from a room now known as the Lincoln Bedroom. His staff numbered in the dozens, not thousands. They worked from decks scattered throughout the second-floor living quarters, sharing space with the Lincoln family. By the early 20th century, this system had become untenable. The presidency had evolved into something the founders never anticipated: the center of an expanding federal bureaucracy, a major player in international affairs, a position requiring hundreds of staff members. President William McKinley employed approximately 80 people in various capacities, far too many for the residence's office spaces. Staff overflowed into hallways. Filing cabinets crowded family rooms. The White House had become functionally absurd, a family home trying to serve as a government headquarters. Theodore Roosevelt arrived at this dysfunctional arrangement in 1901 with 6 boisterous children and a firm belief that presidential family life should be separate from presidential work. Roosevelt, who expanded executive power dramatically during his tenure, also expanded the physical presidency. In 1902, he commissioned architect Charles Follen McKim to renovate the White House and, crucially, to construct a separate office building for executive staff. The result was the original West Wing, a modest, temporary-looking structure containing staff offices and, initially, no Oval Office. The building was deliberately simple, almost utilitarian, designed to be practical rather than impressive. Roosevelt's primary goal was separation, keeping his family's private life distinct from the constant churn of official business. The first family reclaimed the second-floor residence entirely, while staff moved into the new wing. The architectural choice was symbolically significant. By building outward rather than upward, by creating a distinct structure for governance, Roosevelt physically manifested the growing separation between the private person and the public office. Future presidents would increasingly live in one space and work in another, their personal and official lives divided by architecture. Roosevelt's West Wing proved immediately popular, but quickly inadequate. Presidents complained about the cramped offices and lack of impressive spaces for receiving important visitors. In 1909, President William Howard Taft commissioned a major expansion. This renovation created the Oval Office, perhaps the most iconic room in American government. Taft chose an oval shape deliberately, echoing the Blue Room in the residence and creating a space without hierarchical corners where the president could meet with visitors in a more egalitarian arrangement. The room's symbolism mattered. It suggested democracy, openness, a leader among equals rather than above them. The reality, of course, was that the president sat behind an imposing desk, while visitors sat in lower chairs, but the gesture toward equality had symbolic weight. The original Oval Office faced north, toward Pennsylvania Avenue. In 1934, during Franklin Roosevelt's expansion of the West Wing, the office was relocated to its current position in the southeast corner, facing the Rose Garden. This move gave presidents a more pleasant view and better natural light. The new Oval Office became the template for what Americans imagine when they picture presidential power. The resolute desk, the presidential seal in the carpet, flags flanking the chief executive. Over subsequent decades, the West Wing underwent multiple expansions. The building grew incrementally, adding the cabinet room, the Roosevelt room for staff meetings, the press briefing room over FDR's swimming pool, and multiple levels of staff offices in increasingly cramped configurations. What began as a small executive office building became a complex of workspaces housing hundreds of staff members, speechwriters, policy advisors, political strategists, communications teams, and the elaborate apparatus of modern presidential governance. Each president has renovated the Oval Office to reflect personal taste, but the room's essential character remains unchanged. The curved walls, the 3 windows behind the desk, the fireplace opposite, these elements endure across administrations, providing continuity even as policies and personalities rotate through. The office has witnessed every major presidential decision since Taft. Declarations of war, civil rights legislation, economic policy, diplomatic breakthroughs, and countless crises. It has become so symbolically powerful that most Americans can close their eyes and visualize it precisely, even if they've never visited Washington. The West Wing's existence fundamentally changed the presidency. By creating physical separation between residence and office, it enabled presidents to maintain some family privacy while professionalizing executive governance. But it also contributed to the imperial presidency, the increasingly isolated, bureaucratized, powerful office that mid-20th century critics would identify as dangerously disconnected from democratic accountability. Today, the West Wing houses over 50 staff offices in approximately 5,700 square feet of space, extraordinarily cramped by modern standards. with senior officials working in offices barely larger than closets. The building's modest size has become a status symbol. Proximity to the Oval Office matters more than square footage, and the tight quarters force constant interaction, shaping how decisions are made. And where Roosevelt built outward, another Roosevelt looked upward, to the building's roofline where a quieter, more contemplative space offered refuge from the relentless demands of power and politics. Eleanor Roosevelt's solarium, the hidden retreat atop the White House, invisible from the ground and unknown to most visitors, sits a room that embodies privacy within the presidency, the solarium. Built in 1927 during Calvin Coolidge's administration, this third-floor sunroom perches above the Truman balcony, offering panoramic views of Washington and something rare in the executive mansion: genuine solitude. Coolidge commissioned the solarium as part of a larger third-floor renovation, creating a space where the first family could escape the ceremonial demands of presidential life. The room features large windows on three sides, flooding the interior with natural light. Furnishings have varied across administrations, but the room has consistently served as informal family space, a place for reading, conversation, and rest away from the public gaze. When Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt moved into the White House in 1933, Eleanor claimed the solarium as her personal retreat. For a First Lady who revolutionized the role, holding press conferences, writing a daily newspaper column, advocating publicly for civil rights and social reform, the solarium provided essential sanctuary. Here, Eleanor could think, write, and simply exist without the constant scrutiny that defined her public life. Eleanor Roosevelt was an unlikely First Lady in many ways. Shy as a young woman, marked by a difficult childhood, she had slowly built confidence through social work and political activism. By the time she reached the White House, she was perhaps the most independent First Lady in American history, with her own agenda, her own public profile, and her own need for private space. The solarium became her office, library, and sanctuary combined. She furnished the room simply: comfortable chairs, a writing desk positioned to capture the light, bookshelves lining the walls. Friends described visiting Eleanor in the solarium, finding her surrounded by correspondence, drafting her My Day column, or reading reports from the social programs she championed. The room reflected her personality: functional, unpretentious, focused on work rather than display. The solarium gave Eleanor freedom that women of her era, especially First Ladies, rarely enjoyed. She could invite friends without navigating White House protocol. She could work on her writing without interruption. She could hold informal meetings with civil rights leaders, labor activists, and reformers whose presence in more formal White House spaces might cause political complications for Franklin. The room's physical separation from the state floors below provided not just privacy, but plausible deniability. Eleanor's activities in the solarium were personal, unofficial, beyond the scrutiny applied to presidential business. For 12 years, through the Depression and World War II, Eleanor used the solarium as her command center for an unprecedented First Lady activism. She wrote thousands of columns there, drafted speeches, planned her extensive travels, and maintained the vast correspondence network that connected her to Americans from every background. The room witnessed her evolution from politician's wife to political force in her own right, a transformation that would permanently expand future First Ladies' possibilities. After Franklin's death in 1945 and Eleanor's departure from the White House, the solarium reverted to more conventional family use. But the space soon gained another association with recovery and solitude when John F. Kennedy adopted it during his presidency. Kennedy suffered chronic, severe back pain from a World War II injury sustained when his PT boat was destroyed. He had undergone multiple surgeries, wore a back brace constantly, and relied on various therapies to manage pain that would have incapacitated most people. The solarium, with its comfortable furniture and quiet isolation, became one of Kennedy's recovery spaces. He would retreat there after particularly difficult days, resting his back and escaping the demands that presidential appearances imposed on his damaged body. The room thus became associated with two very different forms of presidential resilience: Eleanor's intellectual and political endurance, and Kennedy's physical survival despite chronic pain. Both used the solarium as refuge from the performative aspects of White House life, Eleanor from the constraints on women's public roles, Kennedy from the expectation that presidents appear physically invulnerable. Subsequent first families have used the solarium variously. Some presidents treated it primarily as family space, where children could play away from public areas. Others used it for informal entertaining, hosting dinners and gatherings with a more relaxed atmosphere than staterooms allowed. The room's flexibility, neither entirely private nor fully official, made it useful for many purposes. The solarium represents something essential about life in the White House: the need for spaces that exist outside protocol, rooms where human vulnerability and ordinariness can surface without undermining presidential authority. The building functions simultaneously as home, office, museum, and symbol. But these roles often conflict. The solarium, perched above it all, offers a small zone where residents can temporarily ignore the mansion's symbolic weight. Today, the room remains part of the private residence, off limits to public tours, and rarely photographed. Its obscurity is part of its purpose. While the Oval Office projects power and the state dining room displays grandeur, the solarium simply offers light and quiet, resources as valuable as any in the White House. Eleanor Roosevelt's spirit particularly haunts the space. Visitors to the solarium report a sense of her presence, the thoughtful reformer working by northern light, drafting arguments for justice, corresponding with citizens who believed she would listen because she always had. In a building full of monuments to presidential power, the solarium stands as a monument to something quieter, the interior life that survives even under the weight of history. But not every creature in the White House sought sunlight and contemplation. Some preferred the lawns and halls, bringing chaos, joy, and a reminder that even symbols of state must sometimes accommodate the gloriously absurd. The hidden history of the White House kitchen: most Americans imagine the White House as a place of politics and power, where presidents make decisions and host dignitaries. Few think about the logistical miracle happening daily in the basement, feeding hundreds of people with meals ranging from simple family dinners to elaborate state banquets for 140 guests. The White House kitchen is a hidden kingdom, operating 24 hours a day, employing dozens of staff, and maintaining traditions stretching back to the building's earliest days. The first White House kitchen was primitive by modern standards: a basement room with open hearths, coal-burning stoves, and minimal ventilation. Enslaved workers and servants prepared meals in oppressive heat, hauling food up narrow stairs to the dining rooms above. There was no refrigeration. Ice came from winter harvesting and storage. Fresh ingredients required daily purchasing from local markets. Cooking was physically brutal work, invisible to the presidents and guests who consumed its products. By the late 19th century, technology began transforming the kitchen. Coal stoves gave way to gas ranges, ice boxes improved food preservation. Running water eliminated the need to haul buckets from wells. But the fundamental arrangement remained: a staff of cooks, mostly African American women, working in hot, cramped conditions to feed the first family and their endless stream of guests. The modern White House kitchen took shape during the 20th century. The Truman renovation of 1948-1952 completely rebuilt the kitchen facilities, installing commercial-grade equipment, proper ventilation, expanded storage, and separate areas for different types of food preparation. The updated kitchen could handle the demands of contemporary entertaining while maintaining sanitation standards that earlier kitchens couldn't match. Today's White House kitchen employs a permanent staff, including an executive chef, executive pastry chef, and multiple sous chefs, assisted by additional staff for major events. They manage multiple kitchens: the main kitchen, a pastry kitchen for desserts and baked goods, and a smaller family kitchen on the residence level for the first family's private meals. The facilities include walk-in refrigerators and freezers, specialized ovens for various cooking techniques, and extensive storage for china, crystal, and serving pieces. The kitchen's workload varies dramatically. On quiet days, staff might prepare simple family meals, just a few people eating dinner. But during state visits or major receptions, the operation becomes orchestrated chaos. Dozens of staff preparing identical plates for 140 guests, each dish perfectly timed to arrive at the table simultaneously, each presentation flawless. State dinners represent the kitchen's most demanding performances. Planning begins months in advance, with the executive chef consulting the First Lady, traditionally the White House social director, about menus that reflect American cuisine while accommodating guests' dietary restrictions and cultural requirements. The meal must represent American culinary excellence while avoiding ingredients offensive to foreign guests. It must be sophisticated without being pretentious, impressive without being inaccessible. Presidential food preferences have dramatically shaped White House menus over the centuries. Thomas Jefferson, who spent years in France, introduced French culinary techniques and wine to White House dining. He employed a French chef and emphasized sophisticated preparations that influenced American cuisine broadly. Jefferson's dinners featured dishes like macaroni and cheese, exotic at the time, alongside elaborate multi-course French-style meals. Abraham Lincoln preferred simple food: chicken fricassee, corned beef, and cabbage, fruit. His wife, Mary Todd, tried to elevate White House entertaining despite limited budgets during the Civil War, but Lincoln himself showed little interest in culinary sophistication. He ate to fuel his body, viewing meals as necessary interruptions to work. Franklin Roosevelt's mother, Sarah, dictated menus for the first years of his presidency, insisting on bland, proper Boston cuisine. Eleanor Roosevelt famously cared little about food, sometimes serving memorably terrible meals. White House staff recalled the Roosevelt era as a culinary low point, with creative cooking sacrificed to Eleanor's disinterest and wartime rationing. John F. Kennedy and Jacqueline Kennedy transformed White House dining by hiring René Verdun, a French chef who brought Nouvelle cuisine to America. The Kennedy state dinners became legendary: exquisite food, fine wines, elegant presentations. Jackie Kennedy understood that White House entertaining projected American culture internationally, and she used meals as diplomatic and cultural statements. Subsequent presidents returned to more American-focused menus, though maintaining high culinary standards. Gerald Ford preferred simple Michigan cuisine. Jimmy Carter liked Southern food. Ronald Reagan had famously simple tastes. His favorite meal was reportedly macaroni and cheese. Bill Clinton loved hamburgers and French fries despite heart problems. George W. Bush preferred Tex-Mex. Barack Obama showed sophisticated tastes shaped by his diverse background, with the kitchen adapting to his preferences for healthier options and international flavors. The kitchen must accommodate not just presidential preferences, but also dietary requirements, allergies, religious restrictions, and political considerations. Serving beef to Hindu guests or pork to Muslim visitors could create diplomatic incidents. The kitchen maintains extensive documentation about guests' requirements, ensuring no one receives food that violates their beliefs or endangers their health. Beyond formal entertaining, the kitchen serves another crucial function: feeding the dozens of staff working in the White House at all hours. The kitchen provides meals for Secret Service agents, groundskeepers, residents, Stephanie, and White House employees who work irregular hours. This less visible work, making sandwiches at midnight, preparing coffee at dawn, sustains the infrastructure of presidential governance. The kitchen staff work largely invisibly, rarely photographed or interviewed. Their labor is essential but unrecognized, a pattern established in the earliest days when enslaved workers cooked presidential meals with no acknowledgement. Modern White House chefs are respected professionals, but they still operate backstage, their work consumed and praised without the creators being seen. The position of White House executive chef has become prestigious in recent decades, with chefs like Walter Scheib and Christita Comerford, the first woman to hold the position, bringing recognition to the role. Yet even celebrated White House chefs face constraints unknown in restaurants. They serve one customer who cannot be dissatisfied, work within historic kitchens that limit innovation, and must balance tradition with contemporary expectations. The White House kitchen represents the infrastructure of power, the labor that sustains leadership without receiving credit, the workers who make presidential life possible while remaining invisible. Every state dinner, every diplomatic reception, every family meal depends on this hidden kingdom, where skilled professionals perform culinary miracles in obscurity. But food wasn't the only thing cooking under those chandeliers. Sometimes ghosts stirred too, or at least the stories insisted they did, adding supernatural mystery to a building already saturated with secrets both mundane and extraordinary. Ghost stories and the Lincoln bedroom. The most famous bedroom in the White House isn't the president's. It's Abraham Lincoln's, or rather, the room that bears his name and supposedly hosts his restless spirit. For over a century, visitors, staff, and even world leaders have reported encounters with Lincoln's ghost, creating a mythology that refuses to die despite rational skepticism and the passage of time. The Lincoln bedroom was never actually Lincoln's bedroom during his lifetime. He used it as his office and cabinet room, where he signed the Emancipation Proclamation and conducted much of the Civil War's daily business. The large rosewood bed now dominating the room was purchased by Mary Todd Lincoln, but placed elsewhere in the residence. The room's current configuration as a bedroom dates to later decades, but it houses authentic Lincoln-era furniture and artifacts, including the desk where tradition holds. He drafted the Gettysburg Address. The ghost stories began not long after Lincoln's assassination in 1865. Staff reported unexplained sounds, a presence in the room, the sensation of being watched. But the stories gained credibility when prominent figures, people whose reputations made them unlikely to fabricate supernatural tales, reported their own experiences. Theodore Roosevelt, hardly a man prone to flights of fancy, reportedly told friends that he had sensed Lincoln's presence in the White House on multiple occasions. Roosevelt, who admired Lincoln deeply and kept a portrait of him prominently displayed, apparently felt the 16th president's spirit lingering in the building. Whether this reflected genuine supernatural experience or Roosevelt's psychological connection to his predecessor remains unknowable, but his comments fueled the ghost stories. The most famous account comes from Winston Churchill. During a World War II visit to the White House, Churchill stayed in the Lincoln bedroom. According to the story, Churchill emerged from a bath, cigar in hand, and saw Lincoln's ghost standing by the fireplace. Churchill allegedly addressed the specter, "Good evening, Mr. President. You seem to have me at a disadvantage." The ghost vanished, and Churchill reportedly refused to sleep in that room again during subsequent visits. Churchill's daughter later disputed some details of this story, suggesting it grew in the telling. But multiple sources, including White House staff who served during Churchill's visits, claimed the Prime Minister did report something unusual in the Lincoln bedroom, even if the exact details became embellished over time. Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands also reported an encounter during her stay in the early 1940s. According to her account, she heard knocking at her bedroom door in the middle of the night. Opening it, she saw Lincoln's tall figure in the hallway. She fainted, and when she regained consciousness, the apparition had vanished. White House staff over the decades have reported various phenomena: footsteps in empty hallways, the sense of a presence in the Lincoln bedroom, doors opening without explanation. Some staff members refused to enter the room alone. Others dismissed the stories as superstition amplified by the building's history and the human tendency to interpret ambiguous experiences as supernatural. Presidents themselves have occasionally acknowledged the stories, usually with diplomatic ambiguity. Ronald Reagan mentioned that his dog would sometimes bark at empty rooms, and his daughter Maureen claimed to have witnessed strange occurrences. Bill Clinton told a reporter he hadn't seen Lincoln's ghost, but wouldn't be surprised if the spirit lingered. These careful comments neither confirm nor deny, allowing the mythology to persist without presidential endorsement. The ghost stories serve multiple functions beyond entertainment. They humanize Lincoln, keeping his memory alive not just as a historical figure, but as a continuing presence. They suggest the White House holds more than political history. It contains emotional and spiritual residue from the people who lived and died there. And they reflect American ambivalence about mortality and legacy. We want to believe that great leaders don't simply vanish, but somehow remain, watching over the republic they served. Skeptics note that ghost stories cluster around Lincoln because he's arguably America's most beloved president and died tragically, violently, at the war's end. The stories may reflect our collective desire for Lincoln's continued guidance rather than any supernatural reality. The mind, especially in a building saturated with history, can interpret creaking floors and settling foundations as ghostly footsteps. Yet the stories persist, documented across generations, reported by credible witnesses who had no apparent motive to fabricate. Whether the Lincoln bedroom harbors genuine supernatural phenomena or merely the power of suggestion amplified by history, it remains the White House's most haunted space, at least in reputation. The room itself encourages such thoughts. Standing in the Lincoln bedroom, surrounded by 19th century furniture, knowing that Lincoln worked at that desk during the nation's darkest hour, visitors feel the weight of history almost physically. Whether that weight occasionally manifests as ghostly presence or merely as psychological awe, the Lincoln bedroom remains a space where the boundary between past and present feels unusually thin. And even among spirits, there's always a place for prayer, for presidents seeking guidance not from ghosts, but from God, in quiet spaces where power bows before faith. The Rose Garden, secrets beneath the petals. The White House Rose Garden seems straightforward. A beautiful outdoor space beside the Oval Office where presidents hold press conferences and ceremonies. But beneath those manicured lawns and carefully arranged flowers lies a hidden history of design, political symbolism, and literal archaeological remnants of earlier incarnations. The garden's origins date to 1913, when First Lady Ellen Wilson, Woodrow Wilson's first wife, commissioned a colonial-style garden in the space between the White House residence and the West Wing. Ellen Wilson was a trained artist with strong aesthetic opinions. She envisioned a formal garden reflecting American design traditions, with symmetrical beds, traditional plantings, and a layout echoing gardens from the nation's early history. The garden was completed shortly before her death from kidney disease in August 1914, making it one of her final contributions to the White House. Ellen Wilson's garden served the Wilson administration and subsequent presidents for nearly 5 decades, but by the early 1960s, the space had become dated and worn. First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy, who was leading a comprehensive restoration of the White House interior, turned her attention to the outdoor spaces as well. In 1962, she commissioned landscape designer Bunny Mellon to completely redesign the Rose Garden. Mellon's redesign transformed the space while respecting its history. She maintained the garden's basic footprint, but updated the plantings and layout for contemporary use. The new design featured more roses than previous iterations, justifying the garden's name, along with seasonal flowers that would ensure year-round color. Mellon installed low crabapple trees along the colonnade, providing spring blossoms and fall fruit. The lawn area was expanded to accommodate larger gatherings for ceremonies and press events. Crucially, Mellon designed the garden for television. By 1962, the Rose Garden had become a frequent backdrop for presidential announcements, and Mellon understood that the space needed to photograph well. She arranged plantings to create depth and visual interest on camera, ensuring that presidents would appear against attractive, professional-looking backgrounds during televised events. The Kennedy Rose Garden became an iconic space, hosting everything from bill signings to foreign dignitary receptions to Medal of Honor ceremonies. President Kennedy himself was buried from the garden during his state funeral in November 1963, with mourners gathering in the space Jackie had helped create. Subsequent administrations maintained Mellon's design with minor adjustments until 2020, when First Lady Melania Trump commissioned a renovation that sparked immediate controversy. The project, completed during the COVID-19 pandemic, updated drainage and infrastructure while making aesthetic changes. Critics complained that Trump's renovation removed too many trees, creating a starker, less intimate atmosphere. Supporters argued the changes improved accessibility and modernized aging infrastructure. The 2020 renovation revealed something unexpected. Beneath the soil lay remnants of earlier garden iterations. Workers uncovered original irrigation pipes from Ellen Wilson's 1913 design, fragments of stone pathwork from intermediate renovations, and buried architectural elements that had been built over rather than removed. The Rose Garden, like the White House itself, consists of layers, each administration adding to and building over previous designs, creating an archaeological record of changing tastes and presidential priorities. These buried remnants tell stories about resource conservation during various eras. Rather than completely removing earlier infrastructure, groundskeepers often simply buried it and built atop it, either from frugality or from recognition that future renovations might benefit from knowing where pipes and foundations had previously been placed. The result is a garden whose visible beauty conceals a subterranean history of design evolution. The Rose Garden's symbolism extends beyond aesthetics. Its very existence represents presidential accessibility, the idea that the nation's leader should be visible, conducting business in spaces that feel open and connected to nature rather than hidden in bunkers and corridors. Press conferences in the Rose Garden project a specific image. The president as communicator, standing among flowers, accessible and transparent. Yet this image is carefully constructed. The garden's beauty requires enormous labor from groundskeepers who work largely unseen, maintaining plantings, managing irrigation, ensuring that every presidential appearance occurs against a flawless backdrop. Like much of White House life, what appears natural and effortless actually requires constant, invisible work. The Rose Garden also serves as a buffer between private and public White House spaces. Presidents can step from the Oval Office into the garden for a brief respite, walking among flowers without leaving the secure compound. The garden provides an illusion of openness while maintaining complete security. Every visitor is screened. Every sightline is monitored. Every angle is controlled. Each First Lady who has touched the Rose Garden has left her mark. Ellen Wilson's colonial vision, Jackie Kennedy's television-ready redesign, Melania Trump's infrastructure updates. The garden thus becomes a space where presidential spouses exercise influence, shaping the White House's public face in ways that complement but differ from presidential policy. And when the flowers wilt, there's always room for recreation, or perhaps a bowling alley, where presidents could escape the weight of office by rolling strikes into the night. The White House bowling alley. In 1947, President Harry Truman received an unusual gift, a 2-lane bowling alley installed in the West Wing basement by supporters who thought the president needed recreation. The installation transformed a storage area into a space for leisure, acknowledging that even presidents need breaks from the relentless demands of office. The bowling alley became one of the White House's most unexpected hidden features, a monument to the human side of presidential life. Truman, a man of simple pleasures who enjoyed bourbon, poker, and vigorous walks, embraced the bowling alley enthusiastically. He wasn't a particularly skilled bowler, but he appreciated the gesture and the opportunity for casual recreation. The alley allowed him to exercise and unwind without leaving the White House grounds, avoiding the security complications that off-site recreation would create. Staff and guests would occasionally join him for games, and the alley became an informal space where rank mattered less than technique. The location, in the West Wing basement, meant the bowling alley occupied the same general area where earlier presidents had conducted business. The space had previously served various functions and would serve different ones again, illustrating how White House architecture constantly adapts to presidential needs and preferences. The bowling alley represented Truman's era: post war optimism, middle class leisure activities, and a more accessible presidential style than his aristocratic predecessor, Franklin Roosevelt, had embodied. Dwight Eisenhower, who succeeded Truman in 1953, also used the bowling alley regularly. Eisenhower, an enthusiastic golfer, appreciated various forms of recreation and saw physical activity as essential to managing presidential stress. However, by 1955, the West Wing underwent renovations and the bowling alley needed to be relocated. It was moved to the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, then called the Old Executive Office Building, where it would remain for over a decade. The move across the street diminished the bowling alley's convenience. Presidents could no longer simply descend basement stairs for a quick game. The alley now required a short trip outside the White House proper, reducing its appeal for casual recreation. Eisenhower still used it occasionally, but less frequently than Truman had. Richard Nixon, who took office in 1969, wanted a bowling alley more accessible than the distant EEOB facility. Nixon was an avid bowler, one of the few athletic activities he enjoyed and performed reasonably well. He commissioned a new bowling alley built beneath the North Portico driveway in 1969, creating a single-lane facility that remains in use today. Nixon's bowling alley reflected his personality: solitary, private, slightly awkward. Unlike Truman's two-lane alley that encouraged social bowling, Nixon's single lane was designed primarily for solo practice. Nixon would bowl alone late at night, perhaps finding in the repetitive motion and quantifiable scores a relief from the ambiguities and pressures of presidential decision-making. There's something poignant about Nixon bowling by himself in the White House basement, a lonely man in the world's most powerful office, seeking comfort in the clatter of pins. Subsequent presidents have used the bowling alley with varying frequency. Some embraced it, others ignored it entirely. George H.W. Bush used it occasionally. Bill Clinton bowled there, though his preferred recreation was jogging. George W. Bush, a fitness enthusiast, rarely bowled but maintained the facility for staff use. Barack Obama used it occasionally, and photographs of him bowling became minor news stories, humanizing the president through an ordinary activity. The bowling alley represents something essential about modern presidential life: the need for normalcy within abnormality, for ordinary pleasures despite extraordinary circumstances. Bowling is quintessentially American and middle class, an activity found in small towns nationwide. Having a bowling alley in the White House suggests that presidents, despite their power and isolation, crave the same simple entertainments as other Americans. The alley also reveals how White House architecture accommodates individual presidential preferences. The building must serve ceremonial and security functions that remain constant across administrations, but it also adapts to personal needs. If a president bowls, space is found for an alley. If a president swims, a pool is built. The White House is simultaneously museum, fortress, office, and home, and homes reflect their occupants' personalities. White House staff appreciate the bowling alley as well. During slow periods or late-night shifts, staff members sometimes use the facility, creating informal moments of leisure in an otherwise formal environment. The alley has hosted birthday parties for staff children, casual games between coworkers, and moments of normalcy in a profoundly abnormal workplace. The bowling alley endures because it serves a genuine purpose, providing recreation, stress relief, and a reminder that presidents are human. In a building full of symbols and ceremony, the bowling alley offers something refreshingly ordinary: a place to roll a ball down a wooden lane and hope for a strike, just like millions of other Americans do every week. And just above those bowling pins, reporters now pace over another hidden chamber, the old pool where Roosevelt once swam, now buried beneath their daily briefings, layers of presidential history compressed into a single vertical space. The press room above the pool. Every day, journalists gather in the James S. Brace Brady Press briefing room to question the White House press secretary, probe administration policies, and report on presidential activities. The cramped space, with its theater-style seating and iconic podium, has become synonymous with press-government relations, but few reporters realize they're standing on a hidden piece of history, Franklin Roosevelt's therapeutic swimming pool, sealed beneath their feet since 1970. Roosevelt's pool was installed in 1933 as a medical necessity, allowing the polio-stricken president to exercise and maintain mobility through hydrotherapy. For nearly 4 decades, the pool served presidents and their families. Roosevelt swimming almost daily, Harry Truman taking vigorous laps, John F. Kennedy seeking relief for chronic back pain. The pool was intimate and private, a space where physical vulnerability could be addressed away from public scrutiny. When Richard Nixon ordered the pool covered in 1970, he was solving a practical problem. The growing White House press corps needed a dedicated briefing room, and space in the West Wing was extremely limited. The pool area, with its high ceilings and central location, offered an ideal solution. Workers built a floor directly over the water, creating a platform that would support the briefing room infrastructure while leaving the pool essentially intact below. The transformation was both literal and symbolic. A space designed for private therapeutic use became ground zero for public accountability. Where Roosevelt had once floated in quiet solitude, reporters now stood demanding answers, pressing officials, and broadcasting presidential messages to the nation. The change reflected evolving media relationships. By 1970, television had made press briefings central to political communication, and presidents needed facilities designed for that reality. The press briefing room seats only 49 reporters in permanent chairs, with additional standing room for overflow. Major news organizations hold assigned seats in the front rows, while smaller outlets occupy the back. The seating arrangement has generated decades of controversy, with arguments about which organizations deserve prime positions, reflecting broader debates about media hierarchy and access. But regardless of seating disputes, all journalists share one thing. They stand above Roosevelt's sealed pool, unaware of what lies beneath. The pool itself remains remarkably preserved. The turquoise tiles are still intact, the depth unchanged, the underwater lights still in place though no longer functional. Maintenance workers occasionally access the space through a hatch, checking pipes and infrastructure that run through the area. These workers describe an eerie quality to the hidden room, an empty pool filled with stagnant air, frozen in 1970, a space serving no purpose except as evidence that history gets buried rather than erased. The irony is almost too perfect. The press briefing room, symbolizing transparency and governmental accountability, sits atop a sealed chamber, hiding presidential history beneath a false floor. The juxtaposition captures something essential about the White House. Appearances rarely tell the full story, and every visible space conceals invisible depths. Journalists working in the briefing room have mixed reactions when learning about the pool beneath them. Some find it fascinating, a reminder of presidential humanity and the building's layered history. Others barely care. They're focused on current politics, not architectural archaeology. A few note the metaphorical weight. They're literally standing on historical layers, trying to uncover truth while walking over buried secrets. The White House press operation has evolved dramatically since Nixon's era. Technology has transformed how news is gathered and distributed, but the physical space remains largely unchanged. The same cramped room, the same awkward sightlines, the same sense that the facility barely accommodates its purpose. Proposals to renovate or relocate the briefing room surface periodically, but the space endures, perhaps because its very inadequacy reflects the contentious relationship between press and presidency. Roosevelt's outdoor pool, built in 1975 under Gerald Ford, serves the recreational function that the indoor pool once provided, but it can never replicate the intimate, therapeutic quality of the original pool, the private space where a president confined to a wheelchair could move freely, where physical disability became temporarily irrelevant through water's buoyancy. The sealed pool represents what happens when present needs override historical preservation. Nixon faced a choice: maintain a pool he didn't use or create a briefing room his administration desperately needed. The practical one, as it often does. But something was lost. Not just a swimming pool, but a tangible connection to Roosevelt's daily struggle, to the physical reality behind his public image of strength. The briefing room will likely remain above the pool for the foreseeable future. No administration wants to undertake the expensive, disruptive renovation that relocating the press would require. So journalists will continue standing on their platform, pressing for truth, while beneath them lies a monument to a different kind of presidential challenge, one measured not in political victories, but in laps completed despite paralyzed legs. But long before the cameras, Inauguration Day carried its own hidden rituals, superstitions, and secret rehearsals that revealed how even the most public ceremonies harbor private anxieties and careful choreography. Inaugural superstitions and hidden rituals. Every 4 years, America watches a president take the oath of office in a ceremony broadcast to millions, a public ritual of democratic transition. But behind the pomp and visibility lie hidden superstitions, lucky charms, and secret rehearsals that reveal the human anxiety beneath presidential confidence. Even the nation's most powerful office cannot eliminate the universal need for ritual, luck, and control over uncertain futures. Franklin Roosevelt carried a worn coin throughout his presidency, a lucky piece given to him years earlier that he believed brought good fortune. He kept it in his pocket constantly, touching it during difficult moments, drawing comfort from the small object's familiar weight. Roosevelt, a politician who projected certainty and optimism through the Depression and World War II, privately relied on this talisman as insurance against the chaos he could not control. Ronald Reagan's relationship with superstition went further. Reagan and his wife Nancy consulted astrologers regularly, with Nancy particularly invested in astrological guidance. After the 1981 assassination attempt, Nancy consulted astrologer Joan Quigley to help plan the president's schedule, avoiding dates deemed astrologically dangerous. This practice remained secret during Reagan's presidency, only becoming public after he left office. The revelation shocked some observers, the leader of the free world consulting star charts, but it reflected Nancy's desperate desire to protect her husband in a job where bullets and crises could come from anywhere. The Curse of Tippecanoe, or Curse of Tecumseh, represented presidential superstition at its most dramatic. The legend held that presidents elected in years ending in zero would die in office, a pattern that held eerily true from 1840 through 1960. William Henry Harrison, elected 1840, Abraham Lincoln, 1860, James Garfield, 1880, William McKinley, 1900, Warren Harding, 1920, Franklin Roosevelt, 1940, and John F. Kennedy, 1960, all died in office. The curse was supposedly placed by Tecumseh, or his brother, after Harrison's 1811 victory at Tippecanoe. Whether historical coincidence or genuine pattern, the curse's accuracy was undeniable until Ronald Reagan, elected in 1980, survived his presidency despite being shot in 1981. George W. Bush, elected in 2000, also completed his term safely, finally breaking the pattern. Beyond personal superstitions, Inauguration Day itself involves elaborate, hidden rituals designed to ensure perfect execution. The public sees the ceremony's final performance, but months of secret planning and rehearsals precede the big day. Military units practice their march formations repeatedly. The Marine Band rehearses musical pieces dozens of times. Stand-ins for the President-elect walk through every movement, testing camera angles and timing. Security rehearsals are particularly extensive. Secret Service agents simulate the entire day, identifying vulnerabilities and planning responses to potential threats. Every building along the parade route is inspected. Manhole covers are sealed. Sharpshooters are positioned on rooftops. The inauguration appears spontaneous and celebratory, but it's actually one of the most heavily secured and carefully choreographed events in American government. The swearing in itself carries hidden contingencies. What if the Chief Justice fumbles the oath? It happened with Barack Obama in 2009, requiring a private re-administration out of caution. What if the president-elect freezes or forgets the words? What if weather makes outdoor ceremonies dangerous? For every visible element, there's a backup plan, an alternative process of approach, a solution to potential problems that audiences hopefully never see. Even the Bible used for the oath carries symbolic weight and careful selection. Presidents choose Bibles with personal significance, family heirlooms, historically important volumes, or texts reflecting their faith and values. Lincoln's Bible has been used multiple times, connecting new presidents to the 16th president's legacy. Some presidents use multiple Bibles simultaneously, layering their oath with various meaningful texts. These choices seem ceremonial but reflect deep personal beliefs about luck, legacy, and proper ritual. The timing of inauguration involves superstition as well. January 20th at noon is constitutionally mandated, but the exact moment of oath-taking matters legally and symbolically. If a president begins the oath even seconds before noon, is it valid? Legal scholars have debated this question, and inaugurations are timed precisely to ensure the oath occurs after the constitutional deadline, making the transfer of power legally unquestionable. After the public ceremony, private rituals continue. Presidents traditionally write letters to their successors, left in the Oval Office desk for the incoming president to discover. These letters remain private, their contents known only to the two presidents involved, a hidden gesture of continuity and mutual respect that exists outside public view. The inaugural balls and celebrations also involve hidden protocol: who gets invited, who sits where, how long must the new president stay at each event? These questions occupy planners for months, balancing political debts, social expectations, and the new president's physical endurance. Inauguration Day reveals that even America's most public ceremony involves secrets, superstitions, and hidden anxieties. The ritual appears straightforward. A person takes an oath and becomes president, but the reality is far more complex, involving luck charms, astrological consultations, broken curses, and elaborate rehearsals. Power may be democratically conferred, but humans still crave ritual and control when facing its awesome responsibility. Even symbols themselves have their secrets, especially one carved into the floor, a bird that turned its head and changed what America's presidential seal communicates about power, peace, and national priorities. The presidential seal, the bird that turned its head in 1945. President Harry Truman made a subtle but symbolically powerful change to the presidential seal. He ordered the eagle's head to turn from facing the arrows in its left talon to facing the olive branch in its right. The shift seemed minor, just a bird's head rotating, but it carried profound meaning about America's post-World War II identity and how presidential symbolism shapes national self-perception. The presidential seal evolved from the Great Seal of the United States, designed in 1782 and featuring a bald eagle holding arrows in one talon, representing war, and an olive branch in the other, representing peace. The eagle faced the arrows, reflecting perhaps the new nation's need to establish military credibility and defend itself against powerful enemies. When a presidential seal was formalized in the late 19th century, it maintained this design. The eagle looked toward the arrows, its gaze directed at instruments of war. Truman, who had just overseen the end of World War II through atomic weapons dropped on Japan, found this symbolism troubling. America had demonstrated devastating military power, and Truman wanted the post war era to emphasize peace rather than continued militarism. The eagle's orientation bothered him. Why should America's symbol be perpetually focused on weapons of war? In October 1945, Truman issued an executive order redesigning the presidential seal. The eagle's head would now face the olive branch, symbolizing America's preference for peace over war. The change didn't eliminate the arrows. They remained in the eagle's talon, acknowledging that military power sometimes remains necessary. But the eagle's gaze shifted, suggesting that peace was the goal, war only the means when unavoidable. The redesign applied to the presidential seal specifically. The version used on presidential podiums, letterhead, and official documents. The Great Seal of the United States, appearing on the dollar bill and other government materials, remained unchanged, with the eagle still facing the arrows. This split created an interesting distinction. The national seal maintained its original warlike orientation, while the presidential seal specifically embraced Truman's peace-oriented modification. The change was implemented gradually. New presidential materials incorporated the redesigned seal immediately, but older items, carpets, fixtures, architectural elements remained unchanged until natural replacement occurred. This created a hidden history visible to observant White House visitors. Older floors and fixtures still displayed the pre-1945 seal with the eagle facing arrows, while newer elements showed Truman's peace-oriented version. The White House became an archaeological site where different seal iterations coexist, marking different eras of American power. Critics argued that Truman's change was merely cosmetic. Rotating a bird's head couldn't alter America's actual policies or military commitments. Supporters countered that symbolism matters precisely because it shapes how nations see themselves and project their values. If America's presidential seal emphasized peace, perhaps American presidents would internalize that emphasis when making decisions about war and diplomacy. The seal change reflected broader Truman-era tensions about America's post-World War II role. The United States emerged from the war as a superpower possessing unprecedented military might, including nuclear weapons, but Truman wanted America to be seen as a benevolent power, using strength to foster peace rather than dominate weaker nations. The rotated eagle embodied this aspiration, suggesting power restrained by peaceful intentions. Subsequent presidents inherited Truman's seal design without modifying it further. The eagle continues facing the olive branch today, Truman's choice now tradition. Modern presidential speeches often reference being the most powerful nation on earth, while simultaneously claiming to seek peace, rhetoric that mirrors the seal's dual symbolism of olive branch and arrows coexisting, with preference given to peace. The original pre-1945 seals remain visible in certain White House spaces, preserved as historical artifacts. The older carpets, some original floor inlays, and certain architectural fixtures still show the eagle facing arrows. These remnants create moments of dissonance for informed visitors who notice the discrepancy and understand its historical significance. The seal's evolution demonstrates how presidents use symbolism to shape national identity. Truman couldn't immediately transform America's actual military posture or foreign policy through an executive order, but he could alter how America symbolically represented itself, creating a visual argument for peace that would subtly influence how Americans in the world understood presidential power. Some historians argue the seal change had little practical impact, a symbolic gesture without policy consequences. Others contend that symbols shape thinking in ways that eventually influence policy, making Truman's change more significant than it appeared. The debate itself reveals how seriously Americans take presidential symbolism, recognizing that seals flags, and visual representations carry meaning beyond mere decoration. Today, most Americans never consciously notice the eagle's orientation. The seal appears so frequently on presidential podiums, letterhead, news graphics, that it becomes invisible through familiarity. But Truman's subtle change endures, a hidden modification that reflects one president's hope that America would face peace rather than war, even while keeping both options literally in hand. But no seal can hide the fingerprints of those who keep rewriting the House. Presidents who rebuilt, renovated, and reimagined the White House to reflect their vision of power and their mark on history. Presidents who rebuilt their own White House, the White House has survived 200 plus years, not through passive preservation, but through constant reinvention. Each generation of presidents has rebuilt portions of the mansion, leaving architectural fingerprints that reveal their priorities, personalities, and visions of presidential power. The building Americans tour today is less an original structure than a palimpsest. Layers of presidential modification overriding each other, creating a composite identity. Thomas Jefferson arrived at the White House in 1801 with clear ideas about how the executive residence should function. Jefferson, an accomplished architect who designed Monticello and the University of Virginia, found the mansion's formal layout inadequate. He immediately began modifications, installing dumbwaiters to bring food and wine from the basement to his dining room, allowing him to host dinners without servants constantly entering and exiting. This innovation reflected Jefferson's complicated relationship with slavery. He wanted service without servants' visible presence, mechanizing their labor to maintain dining privacy. Jefferson also expanded the grounds, developing gardens that mixed ornamental and practical plantings. He grew experimental crops, continuing his lifelong interest in agricultural innovation. The gardens weren't merely decorative, they were laboratories where the president tested new plant varieties and growing techniques. Jefferson's White House reflected his Enlightenment values: rationality, innovation, improvement through applied knowledge. Theodore Roosevelt's 1902 renovation was the most dramatic pre-Truman transformation. Roosevelt arrived with 6 children who treated the White House as a playground, roller skating through halls and climbing onto the roof. The building's layout, residence, and offices intermingled, created chaos. Roosevelt commissioned the West Wing to separate family and work life, fundamentally changing how the presidency operated. By removing offices from the residence, Roosevelt allowed the first family to actually live in their home rather than constantly dodging staff and visitors. Roosevelt also oversaw extensive renovations to the state floor, removing Victorian additions to restore what he believed was the building's original federal-style simplicity. This restoration reflected Roosevelt's nationalist vision. He wanted the White House to embody American identity rather than simply copying European palace styles. The changes were controversial. Some critics accused Roosevelt of destroying history to impose his own aesthetic preferences, but Roosevelt believed buildings should serve current needs, not merely preserve the past. Jacqueline Kennedy's early 1960s restoration project, though less architecturally dramatic than Roosevelt's or Truman's work, profoundly changed how Americans understood the White House. Jackie formed a fine arts committee, hired a curator, and launched a systematic effort to furnish the building with authentic period pieces rather than random donations and reproductions. She understood that the White House served as America's most visited museum, and its interiors should reflect genuine historical significance rather than merely appearing expensive. Jackie's television tour of the restored White House in 1962, watched by 56 million Americans, transformed public perception of the building. Americans saw their First Lady explaining the historical significance of furniture, artwork, and architecture, treating the White House as a national treasure requiring scholarly care rather than simply a residence requiring decoration. The tour made historic preservation popular and established the White House as a museum-quality space requiring professional curatorial attention. President John F. Kennedy supported his wife's work, understanding that the White House's appearance projected American culture internationally. The Kennedy restoration wasn't merely about aesthetics, it was cultural diplomacy, demonstrating American respect for history and commitment to preserving national heritage. Foreign dignitaries visiting the restored White House received a subtle message. America values its past and maintains its treasures with care equivalent to any European nation. Each presidential renovation reveals not just personal taste, but deeper beliefs about executive power and national identity. Jefferson's modifications reflected Enlightenment rationalism. Roosevelt's changes embodied progressive era reform and growing presidential authority. The Kennedy restoration projected Cold War cultural confidence, America asserting its historical legitimacy against Soviet claims of superiority. Renovations also create controversy. Critics accuse presidents of treating the White House as personal property rather than public trust. Defenders argue that the building must evolve to serve contemporary needs. This tension appears in every generation. Preserve historical integrity or adapt for current function, honor past presidents' choices or impose new vision. The White House Historical Association, created partially as a result of Jackie Kennedy's work, now oversees changes to the building's historical fabric, ensuring that renovations balance preservation with functionality. But presidents still exert significant influence over their living and working spaces within the constraints that preservation and protocol impose. Modern presidents continue the tradition of personal modification, though usually less dramatically than their predecessors. They redecorate the Oval Office, adjust the residence's private quarters, update technology, and make small changes that reflect their occupancy. These modifications are temporary. The next president will alter them, but they maintain the pattern established by Jefferson and continued through 2 centuries. Presidents don't just occupy the White House, they reshape it, leaving marks that future occupants must navigate, preserve, or erase. Yet even with so many changes, some rooms simply refuse to finish themselves. Spaces that remain incomplete, holding secrets about what was planned but never executed, about the gap between presidential ambition and architectural reality. Unfinished rooms and lost blueprints. The White House contains spaces that defy complete documentation, forgotten rooms in the attic, mysterious sub-basement areas, and storage spaces that hold fragments of earlier incarnations. Most intriguingly, some original architectural blueprints from the building's early decades have simply vanished, leaving gaps in our understanding of the mansion's complete history. These unfinished and undocumented spaces create an archaeological mystery at the heart of American power. The White House attic stretches across the residence, a warren of storage areas, mechanical spaces, and odd corners that have accumulated 2 centuries of presidential detritus. Staff occasionally discover items that shouldn't be there, forgotten furniture from administrations long past, architectural fragments from demolished portions, documents that somehow escaped archival collection. The attic serves as accidental museum and junkyard combined, preserving what was abandoned rather than what was intentionally saved. During various renovations, particularly the Truman gut renovation of 1948-1952, workers found rooms and passages that didn't appear on contemporary blueprints. The building had been modified so many times, often without comprehensive documentation, that its actual layout diverged from architectural records. Walls had been moved, rooms subdivided, passages sealed, changes made for practical reasons but never properly recorded. Some early 19th century blueprints remain missing entirely. Historians know these documents existed, they're referenced in correspondence and construction records, but the blueprints themselves have vanished. Were they destroyed in fires, lost during relocations, simply thrown away by officials who saw no value in preserving technical drawings? The absence creates frustrating gaps in understanding the White House's original configuration and how it evolved during its first decades. The The sub-basements present particular mysteries. During the Truman renovation, workers excavated additional levels beneath the original basement, creating space for mechanical systems and potentially classified facilities. But the exact layout and purpose of all sub-basement spaces remains partially classified. Some areas serve obvious functions: housing HVAC systems, electrical infrastructure, security equipment. Other spaces are less clearly explained, their purposes unknown to anyone without proper security clearances. Occasional discoveries reveal sealed-off rooms and forgotten stairways. During a 2013 renovation, workers found a hidden chamber beneath the north portico that had been sealed for decades. The space contained architectural fragments from an 1800s renovation, preserved by accident when the room was closed off and forgotten. Such discoveries happen periodically, reminding historians and staff that the White House still holds secrets even after 200 plus years of occupation. Lost blueprints complicate preservation efforts. When planning renovations or repairs, architects ideally consult original plans to understand structural systems and avoid damaging historical elements. But gaps in documentation mean some decisions must be made based on informed guesswork rather than certain knowledge. Modern imaging technology, ground-penetrating radar, laser scanning, X-ray, has helped map the building's internal structure, but these techniques cannot fully replace the missing architectural records. The unfinished quality extends to spaces that were planned but never completed. Various presidents proposed additions or modifications that were designed, budgeted, and then abandoned due to cost, controversy, or changing priorities. Fragments of these unrealized plans sometimes remain: partially installed infrastructure, prepared spaces awaiting features that never arrived, architectural elements suggesting larger schemes that were curtailed. The White House attic particularly embodies this incompleteness. The space could be fully finished and utilized, but it remains largely raw: exposed beams, unfinished walls, utilitarian rather than refined. This reflects practical limitations. Finishing the attic would be expensive and provide little benefit since it's inaccessible to visitors and unsuitable for primary presidential functions. So it remains half-finished, a space that serves purposes but never receives the architectural attention devoted to public areas. These unfinished and undocumented spaces reveal an important truth about the White House. Despite its iconic status and intense scrutiny, the building retains mysteries. Not every room has been cataloged. Not every passage appears on maps. Not every modification has been recorded. The gaps in knowledge aren't necessarily intentional secrecy. Some are simply the result of imperfect record-keeping across 2 centuries of institutional change. Archivists and historians continue working to document the White House comprehensively, using modern technology and historical research to fill knowledge gaps. But complete documentation may be impossible. Some blueprints are genuinely lost. Some spaces were modified without records. Some rooms' original purposes have been forgotten by everyone who knew them. The White House thus remains partially unknowable, a building whose complete history cannot be fully reconstructed. For an institution symbolizing American power and transparency, these hidden and unfinished spaces suggest appropriate humility. Even at the center of government, surrounded by surveillance and documentation, mysteries persist and history slips away. And as for the future, it's being built right beneath our feet in security upgrades and infrastructure improvements that will shape presidential protection for decades while remaining largely invisible to the public. The future of the White House. Hidden layers of security. The White House evolves constantly, though the changes remain largely invisible. Behind the building's preserved facade and carefully maintained historical interiors, a continuous process of modernization adapts the mansion to emerging threats. The security upgrades installed today, blast-proof windows, chemical filtration systems, electromagnetic shielding, and advanced surveillance, represent the future White House, a building defending against dangers that earlier presidents never imagined. Blast-proof windows throughout the residence and West Wing replace original panes without visible difference. From outside, the windows appear unchanged, maintaining the building's historical appearance. But the glass itself is extraordinary. Multi-layered composites that can withstand explosive force while preventing projectiles from entering. The windows cost exponentially more than standard glass, but they allow the White House to maintain its open appearance while providing genuine protection. The installation happens gradually during routine maintenance cycles, avoiding the publicity that major security overhauls would generate. Chemical and biological filtration systems represent another invisible upgrade. After the 2001 anthrax attacks and ongoing concerns about terrorist use of chemical or biological weapons, the White House installed advanced air filtration capable of screening out dangerous substances. The systems can seal the building entirely, recirculating filtered air while preventing contaminated external air from entering. Occupants could theoretically survive chemical or biological attacks outside, while the filtration systems protect interior spaces. These systems require enormous mechanical infrastructure, fans, filters, monitoring equipment, backup power, that must be hidden within the building's existing structure. Engineers face the challenge of installing 21st century technology into an 18th century building design without destroying historical fabric or altering the mansion's external appearance. Much of this equipment occupies the sub-basements, those classified spaces beneath the visible White House, where modern systems hide behind period architecture. The Secret Service continuously monitors subterranean tunnels connecting the White House to other buildings and facilities. These passages require constant security, surveillance cameras, motion detectors, armed guards at critical junctions. The tunnels also need structural maintenance. Underground passages face unique engineering challenges, including groundwater infiltration, foundation settlement, and deterioration from age and use. All of this work happens invisibly, conducted by personnel with security clearances who cannot discuss their assignments. Electromagnetic shielding protects against modern threats that earlier security planners never anticipated. The White House must defend against electronic eavesdropping, cyber attacks, and potential electromagnetic pulse weapons that could disable electronics. Shielding involves special building materials, Faraday cage technology, and filtered electrical systems that prevent signal interception while allowing necessary communications. The shielding is invisible but essential, protecting not just the president's physical safety, but also the security of classified information and communication. Digital surveillance systems have expanded dramatically. Hundreds of cameras monitor the White House grounds, surrounding streets and interior spaces, excluding private residence, areas where the first family retains some privacy. Facial recognition software, license plate readers, and behavioral analysis algorithms scan constantly for threats. The surveillance generates enormous data streams that security personnel monitor in real time, watching for anything unusual among the thousands of people who pass near the White House daily. These security measures create tension between two competing values: presidential safety and democratic accessibility. Americans traditionally expect to approach the White House, to stand at its fence and gaze at their president's home. But modern threats require distance, barriers, sophisticated screening. The White House has become increasingly fortified, with bollards blocking vehicle approach, armed officers maintaining perimeter security, and layered defenses that prevent casual access. The building remains symbolically accessible. Anyone can view it from Pennsylvania Avenue, but actually reaching it requires passing multiple security checkpoints that would have seemed dystopian to earlier generations. Architecture constantly updates to accommodate new security technology while preserving historical integrity. This creates ongoing challenges: how to install modern security equipment without destroying 200-year-old walls, how to run data cables through historical spaces, how to update electrical capacity for 21st century loads while maintaining 18th century appearances. Historic preservation staff work with security specialists to find solutions that satisfy both preservation standards and protection requirements. The future White House will likely feature even more intensive security, though it will remain visually unchanged. Emerging technologies, artificial intelligence for threat detection, advanced biometrics, quantum encrypted communications will eventually be integrated into the building's protective systems. But from Pennsylvania Avenue, the White House will still appear as it has for centuries: white painted sandstone, classical columns, symmetrical wings, a preserved image of 18th century architecture concealing 21st century defenses. This tension defines the contemporary White House, a building that must simultaneously preserve history and accommodate the present, that serves as both museum and fortress, that projects openness while maintaining security. The hidden layers of protection represent billions of dollars invested in presidential safety, infrastructure that most Americans never see and cannot know about in detail. The White House endures by constantly changing beneath its preserved surface. The building that tourists photograph looks virtually identical to the structure from decades past, but everything beneath the facade has been transformed multiple times. Future generations will inherit a White House that appears historical but functions with technologies we cannot yet imagine, continuing the pattern of hidden modernization that has allowed the mansion to survive 2 centuries of threat, change, and evolving presidential needs. And so the house endures, a monument to secrets, a building whose greatest mysteries are not supernatural spirits or architectural oddities, but the simple, profound gap between what Americans see and what actually exists behind those white walls, beneath those green lawns, and within those carefully controlled spaces where power hides its vulnerabilities and democracy conceals its defenses. And that brings us to the present, or at least to the present we're allowed to see. Because the truth is, the White House will always have more secrets than revelations, more hidden tunnels than public tours, more buried history than preserved memory. It's a building that collapses and gets rebuilt, a home where ghosts allegedly wander and presidents bowl alone at midnight. A fortress wrapped in a museum, wrapped in a residence, wrapped in 2 centuries of renovations that keep piling up like layers of paint. So the next time you see a president standing at that podium in the Rose Garden, or watch a press briefing from that cramped little room, just remember, there's a pool under those reporters' feet, a bunker under the East Wing, steel beams where wooden ones rotted away, and somewhere in the attic, a blueprint that nobody can find. The White House isn't just where power lives, it's where power hides, rebuilds itself, and pretends everything is exactly as it seems. So tonight, be thankful your home doesn't have a secret underground escape tunnel, a swimming pool beneath the floor, or the ghost of a president who died 160 years ago, possibly hanging out in your guest room. Sleep tight. And remember, some houses keep secrets better than others.